So, good evening, everyone. My name is Yashi. I am a master's student at TISS Guwahati currently, and I am a volunteer at the Indialogue Foundation. I welcome you all to yet another session of Indialogue online lecture series coming live to you every Saturday evening. Today, we have the privilege of having with us a very special guest, Swami Shyama Chaitanya ji, who is on screen with us right now. He shall be speaking today on humanism and faith traditions, Hinduism. Let me just introduce Swamiji to all of you. Swami Shyama Chaitanya ji is a monk pursuing his spiritual calling in Rishikesh. He was a student of Hindu College, Delhi University, and started his professional career as a lecturer at the Delhi College of Arts and Commerce in the 1990s. He switched several jobs and worked in multiple sectors, including media, government, academia, NGOs, and aid agencies. He never really felt satisfied, truly satisfied. So after having worked with the World Bank for a decade, he called it a day and moved to Rishikesh, beckoned by his inner calling, in order to pursue the study of Upanishads and other philosophical scriptures under the learned guidance of Acharyas of the Kailash Ashram. He spends his time studying, walking along the Ganges, traveling, and counseling people in distress. We are very fortunate to have you today with us, sir. And a quick note for the audience, you may write your questions and comments in the chat box below. We will read all of that at the end of the session. And Swamiji, you may take up to 45 minutes for the presentation, followed by 30 minutes of question and answer session. Please proceed, sir.
Okay, thank you, Yasin, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. So, is it possible that you can request others to kind of mute their microphones so that the noises could be reduced and we could
The
get into it?
kindly mute yourselves. We are getting a lot of disturbance.
So let's pray, because we are passing through a very difficult time. We have a pandemic which sort of covers not just our country but several countries in the world. And those especially who have lost some near and dear ones in their families, or those who have some members and friends still suffering from this disease, we pray for them from the deepest corners of our hearts to the Almighty, with whatever names we have been taught to pronounce and invoke Him, because at the end of the day, He's just one and the only one, the above and all around us. Now, before I start speaking about Hinduism, as all of you know, it's a misnomer to use this word because it's not a very internal term to describe this different schools of thought which have emerged over thousands of years in this part of this world. So it's largely a kind of philosophical tradition which is multipolar, multiple voices in it, and they have developed over centuries, over thousands of years. And if we are trying to sort of see the relationship between this faith tradition and humanism, we have to see this in the context of what the philosophy is all about. It's very difficult, again, to sort of summarize it in a few words, given the oceanic nature of this spiritual tradition in this Indian subcontinent. Broadly, I would say that to have a discussion in Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma or whatever, or Indian philosophy or the subcontinental philosophical system, we need to sort of keep in mind a few important texts with which this tradition kind of shaped up over several centuries. So you had the four major texts called the four Vedas. And so you had one, mostly hymns, the second one with a few rituals, the third one, mostly musical, it was more of a tradition of recitation. And the final one, Atharva Veda, was about application of spells, of mantras, rituals for healing, for everyday life. And again, this whole set of Vedas would be divided or seen in four parts. One will be the hymns or the prayers. The second one are the elaborate guidance on how to carry forward a few rituals to propitiate divinities. And then third one are called the forest texts or the Aranyakas, where the people are no more focused on rituals, but they're trying to meditate on the meaning of these rituals. So they're becoming philosophical. They're called Aranyakas because these were written by people who are not living in families, but who sort of vanished into the forest to meditate on the meaning of life. And then finally, you had the Upanishads, where they slowly realized that it is fruitless to waste your time doing religious rituals or only doing meditations and prayers. Instead, you should be focused on your own self, the meaning of your own very being. Now, in this kind of a context, we have three important pillars of this philosophical school. One is Jiva, or human beings, or living beings. Then you have Jagat, or the universe, or the physical world, the human world, the animal world. And finally, you have Brahman, or the conscious self, or God, or divinity, whatever you call it. And how sort of you try to connect all these. In the Semitic traditions, in the Abrahamic religions, God is transcendent. He is above. He is above creation. He is controlling everything. Whereas in the Indian philosophical tradition or the Hindu tradition, he is both transcendent and immanent. He is above us, but he is in all of us. So there is kind of unity in diversity. And how is it explained? So God is, you know, that in the early Vedic periods, there were no deities being worshipped. There were only mantras. They were doing fire rituals. They were doing chanting. But they did not worship any idols in the early periods. And during the meditation period, the Aranyakas, different kinds of prayers and meditations, again, they are meditating on the sky as source of divinity, meditating on the sky, meditating on your own very breath, meditating on your intellectual self. These were the gateways to sort of go to a higher level of consciousness. And finally, you are meditating on the self, which means the word God is what? It's truth or the Brahman, which has no name, which has no form, which has no qualities. So we say God is kind, but Brahman cannot be kind because it has no qualities. It has no name. You cannot address it with any name. And it cannot help you because it's pure consciousness. The interesting catch here is that you are not any different from that pure consciousness. And how are they trying to explain it? They are trying to say that this Brahman or that absolute truth, when it wears the cap of Maya or delusion or creationism, it sort of can create anything. It's like you have a magic show, a magician comes on the stage and he pulls out a cat out of a blank piece of paper or a bag, empty bag. Now, what is true? The magician is true. What he shows isn't true because that is magic. So what God is showing us is all delusional. It's neither real nor unreal. What is real is that truth of God. That is what is real. This God again is just a name because this cannot be talked about. So the final word on truth or Brahman is that you cannot talk about it. And so it's called avang manaso gochara. You cannot know it through your mind. You cannot know in words. So what do? You know yourself. You know by realizing that the known, and the process of knowing is one and the same thing called consciousness or Chaitanya. So it's called Sat is true. What is that? That which is there in all three times, past, present, and future. Chit is what is conscious, and Ananda is what is happiness, because once you reach there, realize that absolute consciousness, then all fear goes because you are afraid of your neighbor, your enemy, another country, another friend. Why? Because there is some threat to you. But once you realize all of this is only delusional manifestation as multiples of just one truth, then all fear goes. That is what Vedanta says. Now, with all this, suddenly you might ask me, then what about this whole creation? We say, yeah, this creation is also there. This is called a phenomenal reality. This is a vyavaharika satya. So, in everyday conversation, these are true, but fundamentally false. Fundamentally, the truth lies in the absolute unity of all this. And in this whole Upanishadic imagination, if you ask why did God at all create this whole universe with so many multiplicities, with animals, with the sky, water, fire, air, water, and earth, why did He create all this? He is saying that ekakina ramate. There wasn't any love. There was no love, so He created difference. We are now seeing difference in the source of conflict and hatred and violence. But in the divine, in the spiritual text, what it says, differences was created by God so that they can be loved, so that people could love each other and they could interact with each other because ekakina ramate. When God was alone, there was no creation, there was no love. So it was only one single truth. So He created. So there's a word called Leela. It's a game. It's a game in which the participants are us, all of us, and we need to understand that this manifestation is like a classroom in which we are supposed to educate ourselves to know our real self, the nature of this. Now, let me take your attention fully to the Renaissance period in Europe, where humanism kind of emerged in a big way. What was it about? This was kind of rescuing the human being from a religious discourse in which human beings were trapped as prisoners. So Renaissance humanism was talking about recovering the truth from the historical texts, the literary imagination. It was talking about more freedom to do any kind of painting and sculpture, and bringing human beings into the center of the universe. So there was a kind of an anthropomorphism, a kind of humanism became a bit of an emphasis on only the human society and their right, for example, to exploit nature, to dominate other societies. Because, for example, animal killing was all right because animals don't have souls in Christianity. So it was not a bad thing. I mean, it's part of food. But in the Indian tradition, there is an imagination in which all of us are interdependent. Why? Because all of us are manifestation of the divine principle. We have taken different forms. Even a plant has life. We have life. The plant cannot speak. We can speak, but it has life. It has consciousness. Even a mountain has consciousness. We appear conscious. The mountain doesn't appear conscious. Why? They say, like in a mirror, you see your face, but you don't see your face on a wall. Why? Because the wall isn't polished enough. So the mountain, the consciousness of the mountain is not a good reflecting substance, as a result of which the Chaitanya or the consciousness which falls on the mundane objects, they do not reflect as much as they do in our case, because our consciousness, our consciousness is much more refined. And this refinement of our consciousness gives us a responsibility. Remember, so far the Vedic imagination is concerned, animals don't commit any sins even though they kill, because they don't have the power of discrimination. So who will become a sinner? The person who knows what is the sin, who has an ability to judge. So our ability to make judgments holds us accountable. And that brings me to the next question, that humanism has a deep relationship with the concept of social responsibility. Where in case of the Hindu pantheon, it is not only humanism as anthropomorphism, but it is kind of pantheism, or what do you call henotheism. So you call different kinds of gods and goddesses, but they are all kind of different faces of the one absolute truth. So at the top of it, there's just one consciousness, there's just one God, there's just one Brahman. and it has different names and forms. And then there's so much of manifestation, but all of this is essentially one. So there is a famous sentence called Tattvamasi, and that sentence means you are that. And how can a person, we for example, with limited consciousness, with limited powers, with limited abilities, be same as God? They're saying, no, that's not what we are saying. You, when you meditate on your inner self, the consciousness aspect of your existence, that consciousness aspect of existence and the consciousness aspect of the divinity at a cosmic level, who is Ishvara or God or Allah or whatever name you call, that is reflecting that absolute consciousness. So he has assumed a form. Why? To give us love, to become passionate to us, to show us kindness. So he is nameless, he is absolute, he is above us, he is below us, he is all around us. There is no place where he isn't there. So we cannot be different from God, because if God is everywhere, where are we? We are definitely in God. What does it mean? That doesn't mean we human beings who are so stupid are divine. No. But our consciousness and the divine consciousness are two reflections of one, kind of metaphysical reality that is one and absolute, the Satchidananda, which is consciousness, truth, consciousness, and bliss. Now, coming here, this responsibility that I was mentioning is not about responsibility only towards human society or towards other human beings. This is a responsibility towards the whole universe. Why? Because everybody is an aspect of that whole conscious universe, and you are just a small cog in the machine. But if you, say, for example, chop trees after darkness, if you pluck flowers after it is night, I mean, there are different rules, there are different advices. You cannot even do cultivation 3 days during the summer, because they say Mother Earth is having her menstruation. So you should not cultivate that time. She'll be hurt. So this kind of an imagination where sort of, you are trying to personify everything around you as having a personality, as having consciousness kind of thing. It makes you more sensitive. It has to make you more responsible. Now here, the humanistic imagination has to be seen in the context of two sets of virtues then. One are a set of negative virtues or no harm principles. So Manu, who is much hated for his statements on caste, has kind of mentioned what are the key aspects of what is dharma, and what is he giving importance to? Daya and kshama. So having kindness and having forgiveness, then having anghisa without having any sort of violence towards anyone, and then saucham, being having physical cleanliness and mental purity, and then dhanam, having charity. So these are some of the qualities he puts together, saying this is what is dharma. Okay, and then this responsibility, I would say, is also linked up with who you are, because an animal is also a manifestation of the divine principle, but it can kill because it doesn't have consciousness. A poor man, for example, is not as responsible as a rich man is responsible, or a physically strong person has more responsibility in terms of his accountability to the human society or to the larger human society compared to a child or an old person. So your rights and your responsibility, your power and your responsibility are also interlinked. Then we have to divide them into two parts. One is the negative virtues. Negative virtues is passive virtues, by being non-violent, by being forgiving, by being kind. So these are some of the things. But the active karmas, or the active virtues, are called part of what is called Purushartha. And what is Purushartha? There are four goals of a human life. What is it? One is dharma, then artha, then kama, and moksha. What is dharma? Living a life in right conduct. So it's not about religion. No. Dharma of a housewife, for example, is to look after a family, to give food to his child if it's a mother. If you are a father, if you're married, you cannot move around. You must take care of your family. Okay. So for a householder, the responsibility or dharma is different from the child. The child has a responsibility to study. So dharma is common to both artha and kama. You have to have ethical conduct in making money or fulfilling your material goals, which is artha. So it can be writing a book or making money or business or games or whatever. But you cannot do it by violating dharma. Dharma is here not religion but right conduct. And then kama. Kama is fulfilling your desires. So you can marry, you can paint, you can do a tour program, but again, not violating dharma. So you cannot do it at the cost of somebody. So dharma is common to both artha and kama. And dharma is kind of misinterpreted as a religion. It has nothing to do with the religion. It has all to do with being in harmony with this whole interdependent universe in which you are a minor player, but with a hell lot of responsibility. And finally, moksha, liberation. Now, moksha here is not about going to heaven. The Vedanta doesn't say you, they say the Swarga or heaven or is just like a five-star hotel. You will be there as long as you have money with you. That is punya karma. So you do a lot of charity work. You are very loyal to your parents. You are very loving towards your wife and children. You are very responsible towards society. So you have a lot of good karma. So in your bank account, of dharmic account, you have a lot of punya. You go to Swarga. But for how long? As soon as your cash is over, the five-star guy comes and tells you your credit limit is over, sir. You deposit more money or vacate the room. So you come back to earth again. That is what is reincarnation. And you will suffer here again and again and again. So in order to sort of liberate yourself, you don't have to go anywhere. It is here and now. And why and how? It is only by knowing your pure nature. Once you know I'm not different from the divine, I'm not different from the absolute truth, then you are not perturbed anyone anymore. And that is what is moksha, a liberation in this sort of a system of imagination. Now, how do you reach liberation? How do you reach that liberation? So they are saying two things. At one stage, all of you are nitya mukta, and because you are that, you are divine. But then why are you so much troubled? Why are you angry with your friends, or you have a fight with somebody, you're looking for a job, you're frustrated, you're anxious? Why? They say because you do not know your real nature. So how do I know my real nature? So to know your real nature, you have to meditate on yourself. But you cannot do it overnight. You have to do depending on your stages. So you have to do right karmas to purify yourself. So in Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna sort of says, I don't want to fight a war with my cousins. I don't want my share of land. I can go back to forest. Then sort of he is advised that is a cheating because you are scared of your duties. You want to run away. It's like somebody says, I don't like exams. I want to be a philosopher. I don't want to take exams because you are scared of failing. So you have to do right karmas. And this karma is kind of positive here. It is not a negative virtue, it's a positive virtue of doing right karmas. So the humanism here in the system of the framework of responsibility involves five yajnas or five modes of sacrifices. One of these karmic burdens that you have are kind of understood in the context of three kinds of debts all of us have. One is Pitrina, the debt towards our own forefathers, our parents. That is one big debt. So that is called Pitrina. How do you pay it back? By being loyal, by being respectful to your parents, but at the same time by raising children who are virtuous. So they have given you love and affection. You raise children in a good manner, and you sort of remember your forefathers and their virtues. Second one is Rishirina. So you have studied, so you have to teach. So you must give away the knowledge, the good knowledge the society has given you. You must pass it over to the next generation. And finally, what is it called? Devarana, or the divine debt. How do you do that? You do that by prayers and meditations and whatever spiritual practices you want to do. This is kind of linked into five kind of major activities. One is called Deva Yajna. So, the prayers and meditation, what you do. Then what is called Brahma Yajna, which is remembering the rishis or your teachers. So the intellectual activities, the social responsibility, something called Pitri Yajna, Deva Yajna, and Brahma Yajna. Okay, Pitri is that sacrifice, the pujas and memorial services you do for your forefathers who have left the earth. And then Manushya Yajna. So you are responsible towards other human beings. So social responsibilities, social charities, and finally Bhuta Yajna. You have also responsibility towards animals, towards rivers, towards mountains. So planting trees, and so these are the four pancha mahajagya. These are these five sacrifices that all of you have to do. And then I just want to sort of because we're talking about humanism, it will be very important to sort of remember that there are three sets of social activities you are supposed to do, what is called Ishta, Purta, and Datta. Ishta is what you must do. It's like your meditation, tapasya, telling truth, and then reading the spiritual texts. And most important, that being kind and respectful to your guests, Atityam. And finally, that Vaishwadeva, that is a particular sacrifice, you offer food before you eat to birds, to animals. And so that is called Ishta. And Purta is Vapi, Kupa, Tadagadi, Devata, Yatanicha. So digging up wells or providing a tube well to poor people in a village, digging up a pond so that people, water sources, because we had a lot of water scarcity, it seems, in the ancient days. And most important is creating facilities for distributing food, Anna Pradhanam, Aramaha, guest houses for poor people. So these are called the Purta. That's why the public work departments sometimes in India are kind of called Purta Vibhaga. Because why? Because that is kind of mentioned in that philosophical tradition. That is part of your responsibility. And finally, Datta, Dana. And what kind of thing? The kind of danas you do while you're entering into a mosque or a mazar or a temple, that is one kind of dana, not the best one. That is not the best kind of charity. The best kind of charity is actually giving people, which is not a religious commitment. You're not doing it because it is Ramadan or in the month of Kartik or it's a Ganesh Puja. That's why you're doing some kind of charity, but out of human compassion. That is called Datta. And what is most important is that being non-violent is in fact the greatest contribution. So that is a dana. And then, so these are the Ishta, Purta, and Datta. These are the interrelated things that I wanted to mention. So, so then what kind of a model we have? It's like a Maslow's model of hierarchy of needs and hierarchy of responsibilities. First is that you have to do right karma, then your inner self is purified. This karma shouldn't have a goal, so it should be doing work without looking for its results. So it's called niskama karma. It's doing work as a moral duty. It's not because you love a person, a friend, you go to take care of him. That is not niskama karma, because you are enjoying it, because you are in love with that person. On the other hand, if somebody is very ill, you get a phone call, you don't want to go, but you are going. That is having very high value in purifying your inner self, because you are doing punya karma, you're doing good work. And then through right conduct, you go to right mental framework. And so when you can get rid of wrong practices of the mind called raga and dvesha. Raga is attraction for something you love. Dvesha is you get angry with something because you are not getting what you love. Okay. And then because of these particular things, you have to have what? You have to do indriya nigraha. It's like you see, you're going by a hotel and there is a restaurant. Very good food is being served, the food you like. So your ear hears this news and your eyes see that, but you are not going because your mind is kind of disciplined. You're going to a hospital to attend a patient, so you don't want to stop over for a cup of tea. So it is called Indriya Nigraha and then Mano Nigraha. So you are controlling your mind, you're controlling your senses. You're disconnecting your senses from your mind. The senses will be there, but you are not affected. So that's how you sort of purify yourself. And then when you do this, they say that your mind is very clean, then you can study the Upanishads. Then it will make sense as to how all of you are just one reality. Till you have that purified state of being, then you cannot study the Upanishads and make sense of it. So, human charity here is kind of an aspect of your search for enlightenment. So, the philosophical search for the meaning of life is kind of wedded into a life of some sort of social responsibility, kindness, and compassion for others. I just want to quote a small story from Chandogya Upanishad, where Deva and Ashura, the demons and human beings, they're actually brothers because they are all created by God. So you can say that the demonic people are all human beings only, and devatas or maybe aristocrats and more physically fierce, and finally human beings, which are kind of middle range guys. They went to God and sought some advice. How do we become happy? We are very frustrated. Then he says the. He mentions the thrice. So he says Dhammana for the devatas, because devatas are very powerful. And therefore God advises them, the demigods, you divine beings or the angels, you need to be self-disciplined because you have a lot of powers. You can harm others by exercising your willpower. So don't do it because you will be unhappy. And then he says, the to the human beings, you are miserly. So you must do a lot of dhanam, charity, being able to give. That is the advice to you because human beings are very miserly. And then the asuras are the demonic people, who are martial kind of people. He advises, then daya, the. So you need to be compassionate because you are physically very strong. You need compassion. Otherwise, the goal of your life gets messed up. You go in a wrong direction. So here again, what is becoming evidence that whatever moral advice has to be given. It's like medicine for a certain disease. So you do not have the same medicine for all, and you do not have the same spiritual advice for all. Somebody need to work. Somebody can do meditation and prayer, but another person doesn't need to maybe do either work or prayer. He can just read books and meditate maybe because he's already free from the burden of work, or upasana because he kind of is a pure soul. He's sort of purified mind. So the key to understanding the way this is organized is that Ramakrishna, used to all the time advise. So he had a businessman, and he used to be very upset when he used to see that there were a lot of poor people. And Swami Vivekananda, remember, we are having a pandemic now in Calcutta when there was plague. When Vivekananda was alive, he said, "I'm going to sell this ashram. You go and serve the people. We don't need this ashram. We don't need any meditation right now." And so you have different ways in which this is interpreted. There are people who say that, okay, this is a delusion because that pressure is all the time there, because Vedanta says that end of the day, this whole world or the whole cosmos, which appears is so big, actually is delusional. Fundamentally, this is nothing to attract you. So there's a kind of a otherworldly pressure, renunciation and yoga and stuff like that. You want to go into the end, you want to purify your mind, you want to meditate. So it might appear that they are kind of taking an antisocial path. The truth of the matter is that if you run away from society without doing work, without purifying your conduct, you might vanish when the Shastras actually have said. So therefore, it has to be put in a proper perspective. So what does it mean then humanism if we elaborate it? Now, if you look at the Upanishads, there's a very powerful sentence as far as open-mindedness is concerned. In the philosophical traditions, the Buddhists and the Hindu philosophers had a lot of dialogue without any conflict. They were cutting each other's arguments, but there is a word called Purva Paksha or the right side of the argument. your adversary philosophically speaking, and he has to be given a lot of respect. You need to sort of listen to him very carefully. So they say, Ano Bhadra Kratavo Yantu Vishwataha. Let the light come from all sides. So that openness has to be there. So you have to have that philosophical openness. And with regard to difference, the advice is that you have to have maitri for people who think similarly, and you have to have kind of anukampa or karuna, a person who wants to learn from you. Then udashina. If somebody is not interested, ignore him. And somebody is speaking against you, you do upeksha, avoid him. But there was nowhere saying you want to have a fight with. That doesn't help, because it will trap you in bad karma and it's going to chase you. That bad experience is going to be like a ghost on your back. After that, you might read the best philosophical text, but to no benefit. So one, the key issue here, which is emphasized in the Vedic text, was religious tolerance, a kind of openness, and then emphasis on dialogue. Okay, so there's a word called Badakatha. So Sahana Vavatu, Sahanu Bhunaktu, Sahavirya Karava Vahi, Tejushina Vadhitamastuma Vidvisa Vahi. The teacher and the students pray together every day. Let all together study, strengthen our understanding. O Lord, protect our truth. But please guide us that we do not have difference of heart. We do not have conflict. So because they were all intelligent people, they could have arguments. That was fine. But argument to discover truth, not to fight and create bloodshed. That was the goal. And then, so this is one particular thing. And then, of course, you have the ashrama system. Ashrama is 4 stages of life. So you have brahmacharya or celibacy before marriage, then you are a householder. But that banaprastha is nowhere coming in our historical phase, because people are supposed to withdraw from active life about 55, 60 years and get into more philosophical mode, be a kind of supervisor, a guide to society, and then finally withdraw completely, become a sannyasi. But here people are sort of trying to live like young people till they are falling dead. So here, humanism is not about rationalism, which is anti-religious, but humanism is kind of a universal ecological imagination in which you are emphasizing interconnectedness and relatedness with the whole universe. And your relationship with other human beings is an aspect of your relationship with your own inner self. You cannot have enmity with others and be at peace with yourself. That the Upanishads are completely saying no. If you have violence in your heart, if you have enmity towards others, stop reading this. It's not going to help you. That's what they advise. So here, that this whole religious, these practices are kind of, you can say that this was, of course, it's interpreted by different people in different ways, but it was kind of interlinked with a social life. And the higher stage, at the highest level, when you are lost in yourself, you don't need to be socially responsible, because you have gone beyond love and hatred. You're in yourself. And those were the people who were sort of not at all involved with anything of this universe. Now, towards the end, to wind it up, because we are sort of coming to a close of this 6:45 deadline I've set myself, there's a couple of few things I wanted to touch upon in the context of what we are passing through right now. We all have to recognize that the human society was never so strongly polarized, whether it is India or it's US or England or any country. We have got terribly polarized for some evil reasons. I do not know if God is testing us. And we have a lot of tension, and people are reading the philosophical texts, but they are getting trapped in their identity politics. That's number one. So we have to sort of, I personally think, sort of twist our attention the way it happened during Renaissance. They went back to the original roots of the philosophical debates to realize that church is not supreme, but human spirit is supreme. Similarly, we sort of need to go back to the text to discover the original humanistic roots of our philosophical systems, be it Islam or Christianity or Hinduism. I have read about different schools of thought and different religions, and I have found that the deeper similarities, the deeper unity between different faith systems is much stronger than the apparent differences at the surface level. But that deeper unity has to be captured by people who are ready to get away from identity politics. The temptation is very easy because you have a mob psychology. The number two, I personally think that we need to attend to the needs of gender inequalities and the needs of the underprivileged. Because the 18th century, 19th century project of bringing in greater social equality has not been fulfilled. We have bypassed them and we have sort of ignored them. We have to pay attention to them because that is, at least within the Hindu system, I personally think that there's a great a need to pay attention to that. Then finally, then another aspect is because the system, the Indian system is emphasizing so much on interdependence, it's a good opportunity to extend our humanism to include ecological concerns, environmental concerns. So the life is more holistic. It's not about going to a temple or reading a sacred text, but it's about leading a life which is more holistic, which is more inclusive, where we just not relate to each other as human beings, but we can also have affection for animals. We can have a sense of affection for the trees and the plants and the rivers, because they become cleaner. God punished us during this pandemic to protect the rivers, to protect the environment. That is a lesson for us. And then this particular thing that the charity that we have to do it free from desire. Because the moment you have ego coming in, ahankara and mamakara, it is mine and I'm doing it, the purpose of charity is lost because mind gets again involved. And so with this particular thing, I just want to bring in a famous statement of Nagarjuna, who was born in a Hindu family, become a Buddhist, one of the greatest Buddhist thinkers. He said, Shunyata Karuna Garbham. He says everything is delusional. This particular thing is vacuous. And this acceptance that the whole universe doesn't exist should make you compassionate, because a pen is a pen not because there is anything called penness, because there is some plastic, there is some ink, and maybe you put together it, you call it a pen. So no object per se exists. It looks like it exists. So it's a kind of same as the Vedantic imagination. But what he's saying is understanding that whatever you value is going to pass away. So, because this will pass away, should make you more compassionate. End of the day, we are going to fall dead in a few years, or few days, or few months. We are not going to be here for all time to come. This particular fundamental fact cannot be changed. You can change your religion, you can change your book, you can change your location. You cannot change the fact that our life is going to end. Now, if we can keep that fact in our consciousness, accordingly organize our thought processes, I think we can be much more compassionate and we can relate to each other. We can embrace this whole universe without ownership, without attachment. So I just want to do the prayer before I take questions. Sarve bhavantu shukhinaha. Let everybody be happy. Sarve santu niramaya. Let everybody be free from disease. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Let everybody see the truth and be oriented towards truth. Ma kashit dukha bhagu bhave. Let there never be any pain or unhappiness. But these four things are interrelated. Lack of disease is linked to truth orientation, and truth orientation is linked with lack of unhappiness, lack of misery. Let me stay here and I invite questions.
So this was probably the most thought-provoking lecture that I've heard in a while. I'm sure the audience would feel similar. And you took us from the grandeur of universe to the era of Renaissance to our responsibility as human beings. Thank you for that. I would like to open the floor, but before that, I'd like to ask you a question myself, and which is basically you talked about dharma and karma, but in today's time, I think a lot of the younger generation grapples with the fact that we sort of don't understand exactly what these words mean, and how can we relate it to our lives, which we find are somewhat different to when we think about a religious life as compared to the modern life. We find certain disparities there, and how do you think we can connect these two aspects? So if you could just throw some
Okay.
light on that.
Yeah, very good question. First thing, uh, spirituality doesn't have to be all the time religious. Religion, the moment you talk about religion, we have scriptures, then there are masters, and then there are constraints, and you are trapped in it. A true recovery of the spiritual faith in yourself can happen when you have the option and the opportunity to meditate on who you are. To do that, of course, you should read the religious scriptures. But the moment you talk about religion, it's about organization, it is about doing certain things, it's about going to a mosque or a temple. These you can do your personal life. But remember that they have to be a part of your own internal journey. If you are happy without going there, there is no problem in your life, well and good, that's not a problem. I'm confidently saying this because there was a time for 10 years I did not ever go to any temple because I was a Marxist and I was a communist and I didn't believe in any God or spiritual literature or anything. But one of the reasons I turned to spiritualism because I found that most of my Marxist friends in the Marxist world was kind of full of vacuum because I found that there was an emptiness. People were doing everything, but there was an emptiness. Now, if you're feeling that emptiness, you will look for an answer. And a lot of people are turning to religion. But I would say that turning to religion blindly, without having that seeking, without that aspiration, to search for yourself. So your journey should not end with religion. You can start it by reading a religious text. That's not a problem. I mean, all of us started, like read a lot of Western philosophy, you read existential philosophers, you read Sartre, you read Gabriel Marshall, you read Franz Kafka in college, universities and colleges. If you're happy, fine. Because if there is a feeling of emptiness, if you think there's no meaning in your life, you want to have a certain, what do you call it, organize your thought process and mind in a way that gives you a greater feeling of life. You are happier. And I personally think that spiritualism, end of the day, is about being happy. Dharma is not religion. Dharma is being in harmony. So we say the dharma of water is to go downwards. The water is not practicing any religion. It is a swabhava. What is your inner nature? If your inner nature, you love painting, then I personally think whatever religion you practice, you should have an opportunity to do painting. If you're a singer, you should definitely explore your ability to sing and then use your engagement with these art, your abilities, your skills, your orientations to, like say, for example, if you're a political activist, if your political activism is only for power, after you become a minister, where do you go? You'll feel very lonely, right? So if you want to get married, okay, you are married, then where do you go? Then you feel very lonely. So that's why the Upanishads say that the journey doesn't end with getting anything, because whatever you get has a limited lifespan, and you have to turn to yourself and look deeper within yourself to find that peace.
Thank you so much, sir. I think we can move on to the questions in the chat box now. I'll just read it out for you. Okay, there are a lot of questions.
Yeah, you can read them.
Right. So the first question says, what is the Hindu belief about the first human who follows of Abrahamic faith take to be blessed Adam?
Okay. You see, the Vedantic tradition, the Vedic tradition, there is no fixed theory about what is creation. The creationism, the intelligent design theory, that God created all this. Even in Vedas, they say that first was nothing, there was the absolute truth, and that truth had no name and form, out of which was created the God came into existence. God is what? Brahman, that final truth with Maya, with delusional power to create. And then he becomes Hiranyagarbha, the subtle universe. And then out of that, Virat, or the physical universe, comes. And then what happens? First, the sky comes. From sky comes air. From air comes water. From water, air comes fire. From fire comes water. From water comes earth. So it's kind of a little in keeping with the physics that we have studied, right? First, it was a gaseous state, and then it became kind of airy, and then it became ice age, so which is water, and after that, earth came. So it kind of tallies with that. So that is what is written in both Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya Upanishad. But this whole idea that there was only a first guy, and after which all these are, to my mind, the Upanishads mention it very clearly. The purpose of writing about creation is not to tell you that creation is true, because ultimately, whatever we see are phenomenal. These are neither true nor false. What is true is the cause of all this. And the cause of all this is a foundational principle called pure consciousness or Satchidananda. In the Abrahamic religions, they have a theory of creation. There's God, and then he creates one human being, then others. So there is a particular, but if you even you talk to some Christian theological thinkers, many of them have also become extremely philosophical, who are no more paying too much of attention, for example, to Genesis. So they are not paying too much of attention. So they are also focusing on the philosophical aspects. To my mind, how the universe came into being is just one part of the story. What is a greater importance? What is of greater importance is what we do with what we are today. How do we take it forward? Because we are not during creation. We will not be there during destruction. We are here for a few years. How do you deal with these few years to make them meaningful for you? For me, that is the most important question. Theology can be there. There are a lot of professors and thinkers, theologians working on it. But you have a few years. How do you make your 50 years or 30 years or 40 years or 60 years meaningful? That is the most important question, because you are here for some time and you need to be happy. You need to find your life meaningful.
So this question was from Miss Alia Khan Fatmi to you, and the next question also is from her. She asks, in your religious pursuits, have you come across the name of the Muslim prophet Muhammad Ahmad in Hindu holy texts? If so, in what contexts?
Well, actually, I was looking for a lot of. It's very interesting that there was a lot of debate and dialogue between the Buddhists and the Hindu thinkers in 3rd century BC onwards. There were a lot of questions and counter questions. The first person who translated the Upanishads into Urdu and Arabic was Dara Shikoh. He had a few Sanskrit scholars. He was a great Sanskrit scholar himself, and he translated the Upanishads because he thought the Upanishads are very closely linked with the Sufi philosophy, and some Sufi thinkers also may have sort of mutually beneficial to each other. And there are a lot of Vedantic thinkers in England, like Rupert Spira and others, who are looking at Rumi and few Sufi thinkers from Middle East and saying these are all 15th, 16th century Sufi thinkers, saying that they're kind of Vedantic, they're kind of Upanishadic. I was a little curious. With my search in different religious texts, there is not any reference to either Jesus or the Christian religion or Islam. I myself have been discussing this with a few professors in JNU as to why. So I personally think that the Indian Sanskrit scholars perhaps did not want to engage because they were they were kind of scared, maybe. I don't know. But I do not know. I think that gives us an opportunity to start a dialogue, because there was a dialogue between Hinduism and Buddhism, and dialogue between different schools of Hinduism. And now in the West, in the University of Berkeley and other places, now they have started a journal called Hindu Christian Thought. But a real dialogue between Hindu thinking and the Islamic spiritual tradition has not taken place, to my knowledge, except in Sufi and except in the bhakti traditions, the devotional traditions. There was a lot of merger. So you have the Sufi saints, and you have the like Kabir, and like these are the people who sort of brought together the best aspects of Islam and Hinduism, of devotionalism, in Kashmiri Saivism and in Kashmiri, that Leil Ded and others. I have looked at the Kashmiri Sufism, which kind of combines, but no great dialogue as yet. And I haven't come across any reference to Ahmad or Muhammad or Abraham in the Vedic text so far. The little I have read, no.
So the next question is coming from Mr. Satya Narayana Sahu. He's asking, how do you suggest to use ideas of religious traditions to take forward the cause of constitutional vision of India?
Okay, so this as I was telling you that we have to. What do we think about religious tradition? The religious tradition is not cast in iron. The biggest problem to my mind is that there's a disconnect between the historical philosophical texts of India and the current generation of people, because they don't have access to this text, because they don't know Sanskrit, they don't study it, and so they read English translations. The best Sanskrit scholars now are either in US or in Germany or in France, so they have to tell us what the past was. So that is a big problem, actually. It's a colonial thing which is interfering, because if people are ready to read the text, you would actually find that much of what is going on has nothing to do with what Upanishads say. So the first state will be like in Renaissance period, they went back to their historical text, they went back to the Roman and Greco tradition, the philosophical text, and they went back to Aristotle, they went back to Plato, and they rediscovered, right? And that's what you can do, that you go back to the spiritual traditions and the text and say what is relevant. Some of the people who did that during the freedom struggle, one was Raja Raman Roy, you had Sri Aurobindo doing it in philosophically reinterpreting. Vivekananda, for example, was talking about practical Vedanta, where he said that, Siva Bhave Jiva Seva, that you think about, he said, I am a worshipper of that God whom the idiots call human. मैं उस ईश्वर का सेवक हूँ जिसे अज्ञानी मनुष्य कहते हैं. The fools call him a human being. So he was trying to build humanism into Vedanta, because he thought with all this philosophy of unity, you have a lot of social inequality. Why hasn't this philosophy contributed to greater social equality? The challenge with us. So one of the key responsibilities of social reformers and thought leaders and intellectuals would be to sort of rediscover and recover these lost traditions and lost truths and bring them. The problem with this constitutionalism is that the constitutionalists do not want to see constitution in the larger universe of a evolving cultural and social whole called a nation or the country, because constitution is just one text, and that is a process of maturity of thoughts and ideas of a society. If you artificially impose it and you do not sort of make it holistic and interlinked culturally, the richness is lost. So, but I would say that if you say that even in your own spiritual tradition, if you go deeper into it, you will find elements which can create conditions for a very rich and universalistic and humanistic integration of different social groups. It doesn't have to be under one umbrella with a name called Hindu or Islam or Buddhist, because the subcontinent has had a polyphonic past. It has multiple voices. And if you sort of can join the dots, connect the dots, then you can have a rich cultural, it's like a beautiful canvas. And we have to sort of paint our own future with colors we have inherited. We can add our own colors. That is creativity.
Since we do not have more questions in the chat box, I would like to take this opportunity and ask you the last question. Since you mentioned about Renaissance in the West, what do you think is the most remarkable spiritual movement in the history of India? Just your thoughts, sir.
You are a student of social science. I was teaching political science, and you are a student of political science. You see, to my mind, we had a lot of very radical social reform and religious movements in India in the 19th century and early 20th century. So you had the Prarthana Samaj, which was started with the Devendranath Tagore. You had the Arya Samaj started by Dayanand Saraswati, who challenged caste, who challenged Brahmins, who challenged ritualism, he challenged idol worship. So he was kind of he was like Martin Luther King of Hinduism, like the Arya Samaj. So he was focusing on girls can also be priests, they should also wear sacred threads. And he was not paying two hoots for many of the so-called traditional Brahmanical thought process. Another such great thinker was, to my mind, the Brahmo Samaj, Raja Ram Mohan Roy. But to my mind, if you look at all these people, to my mind, the most significant creative intervention in this whole process of spiritual evolution is, to my mind, Sri Ramakrishna, who stands apart from all of us. Just look at him. He practiced Islam, he practiced Christianity, he practiced Tantra, and he practiced devotion and jnana, and end of the day, he was a compassionate person. And that is why what he practiced, he said, God can take form, he can be without form. You cannot decide for him what name or form he takes, because he's God. So in that sense, he sort of brought that oceanic feeling. But then, maybe society is not ready for it. It hasn't spread. But I think they have done good job. But it's not because I have kind of soft corner for Ramakrishna Mission I'm saying this. But broadly, I would say that he was kind of a singular experiment, who was not a great intellectual, who did not do a PhD in philosophy or history, was not a professor. He was just an illiterate person. But by sheer example of his own life, he sort of radicalized religious imagination and philosophical evolution of the tradition to make it coherent, all-embracing, humanistic, and universal.
Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of Indialogue Foundation and the audience, I would like to extend a heartfelt thanks to you for embracing us with your presence and excellence today, Shyama Chaitanya ji. I would
Thank you
like
so
to
much.
thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Would like to
Yeah.
inform everyone that the meeting has been recorded and shall be uploaded on the YouTube channel of Indialogue Foundation. Please do have a look, go check it out, share, and do subscribe. It helps us to connect to you better. And there is an announcement, of course. Kindly pay attention. The next online session will be held on the 5th of September. We will take a break on account of Muharram on the 29th of August. And so I would like to see all of you in joining us for the next session. Thank you for being here. A big thank you to our guest for being with us today, the audience for joining us, and the Indialogue Foundation for giving this opportunity to all of us to engage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yashin, and thank you, Bhajad, and thank you all of you. And let's pray for the people who are still suffering from coronavirus, and those who are having secondary impacts of the disease of the pandemic in terms of economic hardship, social hardship. Let's pray for them, and let's feel for them and contribute in whatever little way we can, because that is the best way we can express our gratefulness to God. Thank you, all of you.